In the summer of 1947, a rancher named Silas Renner rode out at first light to check a fence line on the dry country northwest of Roswell, New Mexico, and found something in his own pasture that he was never able to explain and never able to forget. He was 44 years old. He had worked that land for 20 years. He knew every rock and every arroyo on it. And on that morning he came over a low rise and found a long scar torn across the ground and scattered across it, catching the early sun, a debris field of a material he had no name for. Stay with me here, because Silas Renner was not a man who chased attention. He was a hard, plain, deeply private rancher. And what he found that morning, hours before the army arrived, was, in the words he gave his daughter near the end of his life, not from any country on this earth. I want to go back to who this man was, because the account only matters if the witness does. Silas Renner was born in 1903 and had ranched the same hard acreage his whole adult life. He was, by every account his family gives, the last person you would expect to invent a story. He did not drink, he did not go to town more than he had to. He distrusted the government the way many ranchers of that era did, quietly and completely, and the last thing on earth he wanted was soldiers on his land. He never sold this account. He never spoke to a newspaper. He told it exactly once, in full, to his daughter Ada, in 1981, when he was dying and had decided that someone ought to know before he took it into the ground. According to Ada, her father rode down into that debris field alone, in the grey light before the sun was fully up, and spent perhaps 40 minutes there before anyone else knew it existed. That detail matters more than any other in this entire account, and I will come back to it, because Silas Renner was, as far as anyone can tell, the first human being to stand in that wreckage, before the army, before the cordon, before the story was decided. Whatever he saw it raw, with no one there to tell him what it was or was not. He described the material first. He said there were pieces of a thin, dull, silver-grey foil scattered across the scrub, some of it no bigger than his hand, some of it in sheets. He said it weighed almost nothing, and that when he crumpled a piece in his fist and opened his hand, it flowed back flat, smooth, with no crease at all, as though it could not remember being folded. He said he sat on his heels for a long time, trying to tear a piece of it, and could not. He put a strip of it in his coat pocket, and he found, among the foil, thin struts of something like grey wood or grey bone, light as a bird's, covered along one edge with small marks that he said were not any writing he had ever seen. Little figures, he told Ada, like the tracks of a bird that walks in a language. I have handled a great many ordinary things pretending to be extraordinary. This was not one of them. A weather balloon is rubber and balsa and string. It tears, it burns, it stays torn. What Silas Renner described does none of that. It weighed nothing. It would not crease. It would not burn. Perhaps he exaggerated it. The years can polish a memory smooth. But he described that foil the same way, almost word for word, to 3 different people across 3 decades. Nora heard it. Ada heard it. A cousin heard it. And every one of them said the same thing about the man himself. He did not exaggerate. He measured. He was the kind of rancher who counted his cattle twice and wrote the number down. Here is where it gets strange, and here is where a skeptic has to slow down. I am a skeptic. I want to say that plainly. Because the next thing Silas Renner described is the thing that a person either believes or does not, and I am not going to tell you how to take it. He said that, at the far end of the scar, where the ground was torn deepest, there were 2 shapes lying in the dirt that were not machinery and were not debris. He would not describe them in detail, even to his own daughter, even while dying. Ada said he went quiet for a long time, and then he said only this: they were small, they were the color of ash, and one of them was not quite dead. Ada asked him, once, what they looked like. He would not say. She asked him again. He only shook his head. That was all she ever got. Not a description, not a drawing, not one further word, just those 3, and then a long silence, and then he changed the subject for good. Maybe he could not find the language. He had spent 34 years making certain he never would. I genuinely do not know, but I have noticed something about these accounts. The people who say the least about what they saw are very often the ones I end up believing the most. I want to be careful with that, more careful than the story wants me to be. A dying man's memory of a morning 34 years earlier is not evidence of anything. The mind, at the end, reorders and invents. Grief and old age, and the long habit of a secret, can turn a strange but ordinary event into something enormous. I hold all of that. I am not telling you that Silas Renner saw a living creature in his pasture. What I can tell you is what happened next, that morning and in the years after, because that is where the account stops being one old man's word and starts becoming a pattern. Silas Renner rode back to the house and told his wife Nora exactly what he had seen. Nora Renner lived until 1994, and she confirmed her husband's account, in its main outline, to Ada and to at least one other person before she died. She remembered the strip of foil he brought back to the kitchen table. She remembered trying to burn it with a match and watching the flame do nothing at all. And she remembered that Silas, a man she had been married to for 22 years, sat down at that table and would not eat and would not speak for the better part of the day. Now, consider what happened next and hold on to the timeline, because the timeline is the whole thing. Silas told a neighbor, a rancher named Tom Cavett, what he had found. Cavett drove into Roswell and mentioned it. To whom exactly is not clear, and Cavett himself gave slightly different versions over the years. But within a matter of hours, according to both the Renner and the Cavett families, the army came. Not a single officer with a clipboard, a convoy, trucks, armed men, and an officer Silas remembered only as Major Kell, who arrived at the Renner house, according to Ada, before daylight the next morning, and who was not friendly. Think for a moment about what that means. A convoy, for a single rancher, before dawn. They did not send a clerk with a form. They did not send a polite letter. They sent trucks, and armed men, and an officer who would not give his real name. Supposedly this was all routine. There was nothing out there, they said. But you do not answer nothing with a convoy. That is not how a government handles an embarrassing mistake. It is how it handles a thing it is frightened of. Consider how they treated a private citizen on his own land. Silas Renner was held, his word, and Nora's, for the better part of a week. He was driven to the base, kept in a room, and questioned, over and over, by men who were not in uniform. He was not charged with anything. He was not allowed to call his wife. He was told, in language Ada said her father never forgot, that he had seen a weather balloon, that he had always seen a weather balloon, and that if he ever said otherwise, the consequences would fall not on him, but on his family and his land. And then, after about 6 days, they drove him home, and they took the strip of foil from his coat, and they took even the clothes he had been wearing that morning, and he never saw any of it again. Here is the part I keep returning to. When Silas Renner came home, he was, in his wife's words, a different man. Nora told Ada that the husband who came back from that week was quieter, harder, and afraid in a way he had never been before. He put a lock on a door that had never had one. He kept a rifle by the bed. And for the rest of his life, 34 more years, he left a lamp burning in the front room every single night, and he never once explained why. Ada grew up in that house, thinking every family kept a light on all night. It was not until 1981, when he finally told her the whole thing, that she understood what the light was for. Let me talk about the records, because this is where a careful person has to live. Silas Renner really existed, and really ranched that land. The county has his name, his brand, his tax records, his grave. But of the events of that summer, there is almost nothing. There is no arrest record, because he was never arrested. There is no report of a recovery on his land, because officially nothing was recovered there. Major Kell, the officer he named, does not appear in any base roster anyone has located for that period. Perhaps Silas misremembered the name after 34 years. Perhaps. The men who are said to have questioned him wore no uniforms and gave no names, which is, when you think about it, a strange way to conduct the lawful questioning of an innocent rancher. Now, I want to be fair to the doubt, because doubt is healthy. Maybe the family sharpened the story over the years. A hard, frightening week can become, in the retelling, something closer to a kidnapping. Memory is not a photograph. It is a tale we keep telling ourselves until it sets like concrete. Allegedly, the clothes were taken. Reportedly, the foil was confiscated. I cannot put a single one of those objects in front of you. Every physical thing in this account was, very conveniently, removed by the same men who swore there was nothing to remove. That is either the tidiest coincidence I have ever come across, or it is the entire point. I want to sit with that absence for a moment, because it is easy to wave away. Records are lost all the time. Ranchers exaggerate. Families polish a story across the generations until it shines brighter than the truth ever did. I have no doubt that some of that happens here. But consider the shape of it. A convoy of trucks does not roll out to a private pasture over a weather balloon. Armed men do not hold an innocent rancher for 6 days over a weather balloon. You do not confiscate a man's coat and his clothes over a weather balloon. Whatever came down on Silas Renner's land that summer, the response to it was not the response you give to a scrap of foil and a broken kite. It was the response you give to something you are terrified the world will find out about. I keep coming back to one simple fact. He got there first, before the army, before the cordon, before the story was written. Whatever lay in that pasture, Silas Renner saw it clean, with no one at his shoulder telling him what he was allowed to have seen. That is rare, that is almost priceless, and it cost him every peaceful night he had left. Let me widen the lens, because Silas Renner is not alone, and this is the part that keeps me at my desk. I keep a list of accounts from that summer and that stretch of desert. There are more than 40 of them now, gathered between 1947 and 2019, from people who never met and had no plausible way to compare notes. A base nurse, a mortician, a radio operator, a truck driver, and several civilians like Silas, ranchers and farmers and one boy on a bicycle, who say they reached the wreckage or saw the recovery before the cordon went up. Many of them describe the same handful of things. The weightless foil that would not crease, the thin struts with the little marks along the edge, and, from the ones who say they saw the worst of it, the same small grey bodies, roughly 4 feet tall, large tapered heads, enormous dark eyes, and hands with only 3 long fingers. Notice how specific the details are, not vague, not dreamlike. Foil that will not crease, struts with small marks along one edge, bodies roughly 4 feet tall, 3 fingers, no thumb, grey, the colour of ash. These are not the shapes a frightened mind reaches for in the dark. A nightmare is blurry, a nightmare is shapeless and gone by morning. This is the opposite. This is small and exact and repeated. These are not the shapes of a bad dream, they are the shapes of a report. I have spent a long time trying to explain that rhyme away, and I want to tell you honestly that I cannot. If these were famous details, if the foil and the struts and the small grey bodies had been printed in every magazine and shown in every film, then of course strangers would repeat them back. And some of that surely happens. But many of these accounts were given quietly, in deathbed confessions and private letters and testimonies never meant to be public, by people who had every reason to stay silent and nothing at all to gain by speaking. Silas Renner told one person, once, while dying, and made her promise to wait until he was gone. That is not the behavior of a man selling a story. That is the behavior of a man handing off a weight he could no longer carry. Consider one more account, set beside his. In 1958, a country doctor named Dr. Whitcomb, who had practiced near Corona for 30 years, told a colleague that he had been driven to the base one night in July of 1947 to look at what he was told were 2 injured airmen. He said they were not airmen. He said they were not men at all. He described grey skin, a large tapered head, and a hand with 3 long fingers closing weakly around his own. He never met Silas Renner. He died in 1969. And yet, 12 years before Silas ever spoke a word of it, this doctor had already described the same small grey hand, and he added the one detail Silas could barely bring himself to say, that it moved. Consider the wider numbers too, and hold on to them, because I will come back to them. Between 1947 and 1953, at least 14 people connected to that recovery, soldiers, medical staff and civilians, either relocated abruptly, went silent, or, in a few cases, seemed to vanish from the record entirely. Consider that in 1994, the Air Force issued its second official explanation for what happened at Roswell in 47 years, and that the two explanations do not fully agree with each other. Consider that a memo from 1950, declassified only in 2001, refers in one plain line to flying discs recovered in New Mexico and to the objects being of circular, disc-shaped construction, and that no one has ever satisfactorily explained why that memo would exist if there had been nothing on that desert floor to write about. I am not telling you Silas Renner found living creatures in his pasture. I want to be honest about the other side of it, because a skeptic has to carry both hands at once. Memory fails, especially at the end of a long life. A family retells a story until it hardens into a shape more certain than the event ever was. All of that is true, and I hold it, but then I come back to the timeline, and the timeline will not let me go. Silas Renner reached that wreckage before the army did. He held the foil in his hand before anyone told him what it was. He described the little marks along the struts in 1981, and they matched descriptions given by people he never met, some of whom had been dead for decades. A story that is only a story does not do that. A story that is only a story does not arrive at the same strange details from a dozen directions at once. Let me add one more thing, because it changed how I read the whole account. Ada Renner kept her father's secret for many years after he died, but in a small local newsletter in 2003, she mentioned, almost in passing, one detail she had never understood as a child. Her father, she said, would sometimes stop whatever he was doing and look at his own right hand, the hand that had held the foil, the hand he had reached out with in that pasture, and turn it over slowly, as though checking that it was still his. He never explained it, but a man does not spend 34 years quietly examining his own hand over a weather balloon. So here is where I have to leave it, and I am going to leave it honestly. I am not going to tell you it is true. I do not know that it is. What I have is a dying rancher's account, given once to his daughter, and a wife who confirmed it, and a neighbor who half confirmed it, and a strip of foil that was taken away, and a convoy that should not have come, and a week of questioning that officially never happened, and 34 years of a lamp left burning against the dark. That is all I have. It is not proof. It was never going to be proof, and I am not going to insult a careful person by pretending it is. But I keep returning to the timeline, and to that one unbearable phrase from a dying man who had no reason left to lie. One of them was not quite dead. Why would a hard private rancher, a man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone, carry that sentence in silence for 34 years, and then hand it, gently, to his own daughter as he died? Why would the army roll a convoy onto a private pasture and hold an innocent man for 6 days over a weather balloon? Why would they take the very clothes off his back? And if Silas Renner made it all up, if it was only an old rancher's fiction, then why do more than 40 strangers, across 70 years, describe the same weightless foil, the same little marks, the same small grey hand? I do not know what that means, but I know that it means something. What is still buried out there, in a pasture, under 70 years of dust that no one has thought to dig for, and who, tonight, in a ranch house, or a hospital, or a quiet back room, is lying awake with a lamp burning, turning something over in their mind that they were ordered never to speak of again.